In today's episode, we look at a string of attacks and murders arranged by a major Scottish firm, run by the Gillespie Brothers. The killings would be arranged by a mob main enforcer, Barry Harvey, an ex-pro footballer who ended his career after launching a violent knife attack in his teens. Barry Harvey and his associates would work through a kill list supplied by the firm. We look at the contracted hits and the mistakes that would lead to their eventual capture. In 2014, due to an epic rise in organised crime in Scotland, police were given extra resources, money and manpower to break the stranglehold and bring down the major drug and gun gangs. It was called Operation Escalade. The police's main target was the Scottish criminal firms. One of the targets was the Gillespie Brothers, James and Barry. The police's directives was to go for big players and the people and companies who clean the money. Since 2014, it has seen 42 people convicted for organised crime offences, which include involvement in drugs, firearm offences and money laundering. It led to the arrest of a further 8 fugitives linked to the group's activities in Scotland on the international warrants in Europe and South America. But the tougher nuts to crack would be the drug lords, the Gillespie Brothers, with James and Barry sending out enforcers to do a series of murder contracts that would bring about the downfall of their operation. Gary Moore was 32 years old and was a gym owner in Lanarkshire. Moore had owed a £100,000 drug debt to the Gillespie crime gang. Hitman Barry Harvey was head enforcer to the Gillespies and was tasked with the contract. With Barry Harvey was gang associate Thomas Guthrie. Gary Moore had been repeatedly visited by Neil Anderson, associate of Barry Harvey, to ask him when he's going to pay what he owes. Neil Anderson would act as Gary Moore's mate and tell him he needs to take the money he owes pretty seriously. These people don't mess around. Gary Moore would say the money's on its way, but he'd keep dodging payment. The word was passed down from the top, and time would run out for Gary Moore on September the 6th, 2018. While at his home, Gary Moore received a phone call where he was lured to see Neil Anderson, where they had a brief conversation. A Skoda then pulled up where the two men were talking, and a hooded gunman, Barry Harvey, got out of the car. Thomas Guthrie was the driver. Harvey was holding a Glock pistol, took aim and shot Gary Moore 9 times in the body and head. Harvey jumped back into the car and it sped away, driving through 3 sets of red lights. The Skoda was driven into the countryside, where they were followed by another gang associate, Scott Brown. He followed the Skoda to a farm in Baldernock, East Dunbartonshire, where it was set on fire. For a few months, the hitmen would go into hiding. Barry Harvey would use his money to fund a holiday with his girlfriend and a trip to Turkey to get his teeth fixed, known as turkey teeth. The assassination of Gary Moore led to a police appeal. The white Skoda Fabia, with its original registration, was SH13 UMG. It was stolen from the city of Pollokshields on August 2nd, 2018. The Skoda had been seen on traffic cameras on false plates driving in the area of Gary Moore's house on the night before his murder. The police appeal revealed nothing, and not one person phoned about the murder. After the murder, Gary Moore had slowly become forgotten in the news. Barry Harvey would recruit Thomas Guthrie as a driver and Darren Owen for the next job. In South Lanarkshire, on the 3rd of December 2018, at the car park of veterinary surgeons, dog breeder and convicted drug dealer Scott Bennett, who was 43 years old, was the next contract. Scott Bennett had a drug conviction and had been released serving 15 months after he was caught with 6 kilograms of cannabis in his car in 2015. On the veterinary surgeon's CCTV, stationed at the entrance of the car park, it shows Scott Bennett pulling into a parking space in his hired Peugeot van, and then being joined by another vehicle, a silver BMW 3 Series Coupe. The silver BMW pulled up beside him, driven by a hooded Thomas Guthrie, and the passenger, who was wearing a high-vis vest, was Barry Harvey. He got out with a Glock firearm and shot Bennett through the window. The bullet entered Scott Bennett's jaw. It passed through his teeth, cut his tongue, and lodged in his neck. Despite receiving serious facial injuries, Bennett managed to speed away and drive his van to the nearby Blue Rupee restaurant for help. The BMW sped away and was followed by fellow gang member Darren Owen. The BMW was later found burnt out. Scott Bennett, unbelievably, had survived being shot in the head. In an operation, Scott Bennett's fractures were repaired with 2 titanium plates and 8 titanium screws. The bullet was too dangerous to be removed and remains in his neck, close to his spine. The next attack will be on Thursday, July the 19th, 2018. Joe Shields, who was 63 years old, was a lawyer who specialised in high-end criminal trials. Mr. Shields defended a rival Scots crime gang, headed by David Sell, who was in prison for 16 years in 2018 for an abduction and torture of drug dealer Robert Allen. Thomas Guthrie had been waiting for quite some time for his target. CCTV showed lawyer Mr. Shields leave his office at the end of the day. Thomas Guthrie appeared and launched a vicious knife attack on the lawyer. The injuries sustained by Mr. Shields were brutal and swift. He had a cut from his ear to the corner of his mouth and another to the right temple, which needed 10 stitches. He had a cut on his right cheek and defensive injuries to his hands as he tried to protect his face. He also had slashes to his back. Mr. Shields was held back to his office by witnesses and colleagues, who rang 999 for help. The attacker, Thomas Guthrie, was seen running to a white saloon car. Police later released a description of the attacker. The suspect police were looking for was described as white, aged around 30 years old, of skinny build, around 5'10" to 6 foot in height, and of gaunt appearance. He was wearing a grey hoodie. The police launched an appeal, but it wouldn't produce any worthwhile leads. Barry Harvey and Thomas Guthrie would make the last hit for the firm on December 3rd, 2018. Polish national Rafael Leo was shot once and left in a stolen Mercedes GLE, which was then set alight, in an incident believed to be related to drugs and drug debt. Rafael Leo told his cousin that he was going to return to Scotland. He was being set up with a job in Valencia to work off his drug debt. He was picked up in a Mercedes GLE, stolen from an address in Edinburgh at about 7:30 p.m. on the night of his murder. He was then driven to Lanarkshire, where he was shot in the head and killed. He is not known out of the two who fired the fatal shot. He was put into the Mercedes car and it was set ablaze. It is widely known by police, through police informants, that the gang behind the contracted hits was connected to the Gillespie Brothers. In 2019, with arrests to major leaders of their gang, the brothers fled to Brazil and are under protection of the gangs that run part of the country there. The Gillespies pay big money for their protection. With the contracted hits police had found through phone GPS, Scott Brown then turned police informant. His testimony of the full events, Scott Brown gave evidence of the steps of surveillance of the targets, what weapons were used, and the descriptions of the getaway cars and the locations they were stolen from. The cases would take nearly 3 years for the police to put together, with other witnesses remaining silent. On the 20th of March 2024, at a 12-week trial at the High Court in Glasgow, Judge Lord Clark commented, "These were extremely brutal offences, done because of drug debts owed by the victims. Each shooting was meticulously planned in advance. Crimes involving the use of guns are of the uppermost concern to the public and of the court. The fact the sale of drugs causes these appalling acts of violence and planned assassinations due to drug debt is deeply disturbing. The hitman Barry Harvey was described in court as being an enforcer and a top dog, while subservient Guthrie did his bidding. Barry Harvey was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 29 years. Darren Owen was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 22 years. Thomas Guthrie was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 22 years. Neil Anderson was sentenced to life with a minimum term of 21 years. Scott Brown was remanded into custody and then put into witness protection for his testimony against the gang. A gang who thought they were untouchable are now serving life sentences. The Gillespie Brothers evaded capture and began living a good life in Brazil after paying for protection from the gang there. From news and police sources, the brothers are rumoured to have been murdered after the gang protecting them in Brazil put the prices up in a shakedown that ended in their lives. UK police have said that 2 Scottish men in Brazil would be noticed. With the money on offer for information, there's been nothing since 2019, with not one rumoured sighting, with police still confiscating criminal assets. Police sources have said they are still high-profile fugitives, but they may have to now take into account that it's highly probable the brothers have met their end in Brazil.